Hey everyone, it's Samuel.
And I'm Matt.
And welcome to Plot Hooks, the podcast where we explore the arts of narrative and collaborative storytelling in the world's premier RPG, Dungeons & Dragons.
Today, in the prime material, creating good plot twists in your stories.
In the wilds, the jackalwere.
And in the tavern, what would you do if someone insane ended up in a high seat of power?
Alright, let's go. So how's it going, Matt?
Going well. How about yourself?
Doing pretty good. Excited to talk about plot twists today.
Yeah.
Before we get into the prime material, just a few announcements to get out of the way. Remember to follow us on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. You could subscribe to our YouTube channel. And remember, once we hit 250 followers on Twitter, we're giving away a free D&D sourcebook of a random follower's choice. Whoever wins will be able to choose any D&D book that they want. Whether you want to start your collection with the Player's Handbook or one of the latest books, such as the recently announced Adventurer's Guide to Wild Mount, we'll be happy to get any of those books to a random follower once we hit 250. And remember to support us on Patreon as well. That really provides an opportunity for us to continue to improve the show. And we'll be having some more fun and cool stuff coming out there soon. All right, without further ado, plot twists. We all love a good plot twist, don't we? They're awesome literary devices where a story takes a sudden change in direction. It shifts a narrative. It changes one's view of past events and alters the expected outcome of future events. And when it's done correctly, plot twists add a lot to a narrative. You know, if you think of a story without them, it quickly becomes stale and predictable. As such, just about every narrative incorporates plot twists in varying degrees. You can go on the internet and see dozens of lists where people are just giving their top 10 favorite plot twists in movies or in books or in other media.
Well, but at the same time, when plot twists are not incorporated in an effective manner, it can really harm a story. It can make it feel shallow and fake or melodramatic or create numerous plot holes by its inclusion or any other number issues.
Yeah, and all of those, it really breaks down the audience's immersion and investment in the narrative. And all of these things are true in Dungeons & Dragons as well, where your audience is your players. The people actually telling this collaborative story with you are also your audience. And as the steward of the story from the Dungeon Master's perspective, it's the DM's job to incorporate plot twists into the collaborative storytelling process in a way that benefits the narrative and not detract from it.
So today, we're going to go over 3 things that can make for a good plot twist. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but it's enough to get an idea of how we can tackle this element of storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing we wanted to go over is that plot twists should be planned ahead. They should be planned ahead. The DM should know the reality of any given situation even before the plot twist is being enacted. Foreshadowing and misdirection can be fully implemented here. If you just decide before a session that you're going to have a plot twist, then it's not going to make much sense. It's not going to track. It's not going to be believable. Even before the initial plot is implemented, you should know what the plot twist is going to be. Otherwise, you're just opening yourself up for your adventure to feel forced or to feel fake, or for your players to discover plot holes as they're going throughout your narrative.
Well, and not only do you avoid many negatives by planning your plot twist ahead of time, but you also get positive benefits as well. If you know what's really going on, you can educatedly increase tensions by having the characters fail because of their ignorance. The clues that you drop to the truth will be well placed and will join together in something much more cohesive.
Yeah, absolutely. The main gist of this point is just that plot twists are something that cannot be done without a basis.
Right.
They have to be rooted in your narrative already, and in order to do that, you have to know that they're coming.
Right, and this is partly in an effort to play fair at the table, right? Because if you have an instance where a plot twist kind of comes out of left field, that might surprise your players initially. And it'd be like, oh, wow, we never saw this coming. But then if they start thinking about it and it doesn't make sense, it's going to feel like you were cheating. Like you have a character and it's like, oh, this lord was secretly a dragon who polymorphed the whole time. And then they look back and it's like, well, there's no reason for that. And in fact, we have things that contradict because we cast detect magic and we couldn't blah, blah, blah. And you can argue your way out of that to a degree, but it's going to feel messy. So the better planned ahead it is, the better off your story's going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the ideas as we talk about the Dungeon Master being the steward of the narrative. This is one of the areas where your stewardship really gets tested. Because if you just have your plot twist randomly appear out of nowhere like that, that's not being a very good steward of the particular story. Your players are entrusting their characters, entrusting their time, and entrusting their part of the collaborative storytelling to you as the Dungeon Master. And just to throw something out willy-nilly without planning it really can just harm that effort. And even if there aren't any plot holes or anything that's created, the immersion that gets lost from just throwing something out there like that can really detract from a story.
On to our second point, which is your plot twists should connect with the player's stories.
Yeah, this is another key aspect. Not only should your story be planned ahead, but it should also connect. That's how you're going to be able to make your plot twist much more enjoyable to the party. By planning it ahead, you make it make sense. By connecting it to your players' stories, then you really make it enjoyable. Having the twist to be completely detached from the party, again, makes it hard for that investment, for that immersion to really take place. You know, if you're in a setting where all of a sudden the kingdom next door that the players have never interacted with, the characters have never been there, it's just been something that's part of your world's backstory, for lack of a better term. If that kingdom suddenly gets overthrown in a massive coup, well, that might be a great plot twist for your world as a DM. But really, it's not something that connects to your players' stories. Your players aren't going to care. We have to remember as DMs that our players are not inherently invested in our world. Our players are inherently invested in their characters. And so your plot twist has to involve them specifically, not just involve the environment. It has to either involve them as individuals or be in a situation that affects them.
Right, and the example you mentioned of, like, you know, a kingdom that is that gets suddenly overthrown, and like how that's sure interesting, but it's not going to affect your players. Your point about investment is correct, because that could be useful to set up a future story. You know, in my setting, I have a bunch of my own custom setting that we're running a game in right now. I have a bunch of factions running in the background who are doing things, and I might, drop the news that such and such a kingdom has begun an invasion, out of nowhere of another one.
Yeah.
But I'm going to throw it in there as a little bit of world information, or maybe to set up, a future conflict.
Yeah.
But I shouldn't say that and then expect my players to, react with shock and horror, because we've never been there. We don't know anyone there. Yeah. We don't care.
Yeah.
But there are a couple of ways that we can make sure that your players do connect with the plot twist, so they are invested in it.
Yeah. The first is just to have the players uncover the twist. And this, I think, is something that can be a little nuanced to do, but I think really, really helps if it's done right. Remember, Dungeons & Dragons is all about the collaborative storytelling. And if the DM is just reporting all the plot twists to the characters via NPCs, having Skyrim's courier show up to the party in the middle of nowhere and just sharing this information with the party, there's not going to be as much of an investment with that. But if you drop clues and you drop hints, and again, you have to have planned this ahead of time in order to make this way of revealing a plot twist work. But if the right clues are dropped, the right foreshadowing is done, then your players can really involve themselves by unfolding the stories themselves. They're finding out these little bits of information here and there, and they're slowly being able to connect the dots themselves until they're able to discover your plot twist by themselves. Otherwise, if all that you ever do in your stories is just tell them the plot twist via NPCs, then you can end up in a situation where the players become side characters to the DM's story rather than actual actors and protagonists in the collaborative storytelling as themselves. If you drop the clues and then they reveal the twist, it can really be satisfying.
Yeah, it's the difference between having a character walk into a room and dramatically declare, it's like, no, I am the mastermind.
Yeah.
And your players having a stealth infiltration mission into, some baron's manor and finding the documents that reveal, in fact, he is, in fact, the one behind, the master plan.
Yeah.
One is something that the players are listening to, and maybe if you're a good enough storyteller, maybe that's enjoyable for them. The other is engaging them directly into the action, where they are the ones. They have a fun story to tell about what their character did, as opposed to, oh, well, my DM, dropped this twist on us.
And doing this requires you as a DM to know your table a little bit, because depending on how often you meet and how well your players take notes, all of that determines how you have to drop all those hints and how many hints you have to drop. With some tables where you have people taking really good notes and you're meeting every week and everybody is on track with your story, it's going to be a lot easier for your players to actually uncover the twists that you want them to uncover. If you're meeting only once a month or something like that, then it can be harder for them to detect and remember all the little details that you dropped 2 sessions back about that little artifact that they found in the mansion they were infiltrating. And so you have to do a little bit of a job of reading the table in order to drop the right hints and in the right moments and make it significant enough where your players will actually catch those hints.
Right, and this is actually probably a good, this is a bit of an aside, but I think it's an important thing to remember when you're thinking about plot twists, is to just, like you said, to read your table and to decide really if the plot twist is necessary and if it will be an addition to the story.
Yeah, that's
because
true.
You can end up cluttering your narrative with like, and it was actually this the whole time, when your players who weren't really invested and weren't really, that's not why they were coming to the table. They were coming for exploring the world or dealing with this particular character or whatever they were attached to. The plot twist might just land flat as or it might even prove to be a distraction. So reading your table in regards to, will this improve the experience? Will this get the reaction we're looking for? Is an important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. The other way that you can connect the players' stories with your plot twist is to have the twist happen directly to the players or what they care about. So instead of them uncovering the twist through their own investigation and their own intelligence, here you can have a dramatic twist happen directly to the PCs.
Yeah, and generally, if you're going to be... and this is there's a term in storytelling and writing manuals and the like called the law of conservation of detail, which basically means that if something isn't important, you don't mention it. And that's not a hard and fast rule. You can include world building fluff and flavor and atmosphere because that's part of the experience of D&D. But a plot twist should be something that if you're going to use it, it should be very pointed and it should exist for a very specific purpose, and that purpose should be to engage and entertain your players.
Yeah.
So you're really going to want the plot twist to be, most of the time, directed at your party, not necessarily something your party just like happens across, right?
Yeah.
And if you can connect it to them, all the better. Like the closer to home the plot twist can be, the better reaction you're going to have.
Yeah, this type of plot twist could be an attack by an army on the city the PCs are in, rather than an attack by an army on an unrelated city. You know, the burning down of the character's home, or versus the burning down of a random structure. Both of those things could be interesting in their own right, but one is more world building, and one is a sudden occurrence, sudden twist in your narrative which affects the players directly. And that direct way of infecting is really what you want if the players are not going to uncover the twist themselves. You want the twist to actually involve them specifically.
Our third point is that plot twists should not needlessly undo the work of your player characters.
Yeah. And that's not to say that the PCs always have to find what they're looking for, that they never can have setbacks. No, not at all. But there should never be a massive undoing of your party's work without a good reason.
Right.
And perhaps the best way to explain what I mean by that is with an example. Let's say that you, as the dungeon master, have planned out and know that an NPC that travels with the party occasionally is actually going to turn out to be a villain. You've planned that ahead, you know, and it could be an awesome twist done right. But in this case, the party was going on adventures trying to endear themselves to a specific kingdom. And after 3 sessions of work going through a dungeon trying to obtain a powerful artifact, they're on their way back to the main capital of this kingdom to culminate this adventure and endear themselves, as they've been trying to do, to the monarch of this particular kingdom. And this NPC just shows up out of the blue and destroys it.
Right.
It didn't connect to anything in the adventure. It's just a twist where you undermine 3 sessions of work for your table by throwing this twist in here where this NPC turned out to be a villain, and now all their work is destroyed of trying to endear themselves to the kingdom because the artifact that they were supposed to locate and protect and bring back to this kingdom was destroyed. And I think that in those kind of circumstances, that just undoes too much of the player's work. To have just something random unravel all that the players worked for. You know, now, again, that doesn't mean that there can't be setbacks. That doesn't mean that if this villain is trying to stop them from endearing themselves and is part of this overarching storyline, sure, have that be part of the narrative. But just to undo your players' work without meaning or reason is just a way to lose your table.
Yeah.
And will never end well for a plot twist.
Yeah. And in the same situation, and just sort of to kind of, I think, expand on what you just said there, is about it making sense within the storyline, the narrative, so it doesn't feel like your players' work is being undone. Because I think that's the big thing.
Yeah.
Is a lot of running D&D is... This sounds a little bit strange, but if people have run tables, they know what I mean. But like managing the emotions at the table and trying to be sure that the feeling of, well, what was the point, doesn't come up.
Yeah. Because
that will lose your table. But in this same example...
That'll take you out whenever you do that. That will take you out of that immersion, and that collaborative storytelling that you're trying to implement will be gone because your players will all of a sudden be out of the story and just be complaining in their own heads if they're not complaining out loud.
Right. And I think to some degree, whether this plot twist you just described would work, because there's a situation where it might work better, where in the same situation as part of the story, this evil NPC is also seeking the same item for the same reasons. And then we have a connection between the player and this NPC. And then this twist happens and he destroys it. Well, now the point of the story has become, well, why did he destroy it? What's his point? He has become sort of the focal point here. Mm-hmm. Whereas in the previous example, he just shows up and destroys the player's hard work.
Yeah.
So, for example, I pulled a plot twist in a game I ran where an NPC who had been with the party for a while, who had always been intended to betray the party. Mm-hmm. I think I mentioned in the previous episode where I had to spring the surprise earlier, but I always intended him to be a villain or an antagonist. When he did turn, the players, they weren't mad at me. I think I gave a description of he was on the ship with one of the party was split, and he was on the ship with other party members. And I described, like he draws his weapon and like aims it at one of the players. And the table's reaction wasn't, oh man, we put so much in work here and he was our friend. It was, oh no, we have to get back there now. Crap, I knew he was going to do it. And da-da-da-da. There was all this like energy of crap, we knew it or we should have suspected and we need to get back there. Sure. And that was fun because suddenly there was tension. There was no feeling of betrayal. It's almost like you have to pull a betrayal without giving the sense of betrayal when you're doing a plot twist. So that's a difficult thing to do, but when you can do it right and you don't undermine the player's efforts, it can work really well.
Yes, absolutely.
And one thing I think that while we're on this note, I think is important to mention is, and this is just a good rule of thumb with storytelling, is to not overdo your plot twists. Because, like this is just an example, but let's say your players have like a house, you're doing a localized campaign in a city, and they have a house to hang out with.
Sure.
And then they find out that like maybe the house is possessed by an intelligence or a spirit or something. It's like, oh wow, that was unexpected. Cool. Well, then it turns out that like, oh wait, no, this item you had was also possessed, and oh, your character's father is actually the great antagonist. And oh, by the way, your deceased little brother from your backstory isn't dead. He's a white and he's come back. And like, eventually your players are going to say, can we just rest for a minute? Yeah. I think we've all read stories or seen films where there's just a barrage of aha moments. And eventually it just gets tiresome. Yeah. And plot twists are like spices. If you overdo it, you're probably going to just get people to leave the table because it's too much. So you want to use them sparingly and sharply and with precision. You don't just want to keep throwing them at the wall.
Sure.
Because eventually your players will burn out from the surprise and it won't be fun anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And one final thing I suppose we should mention before we close out the prime material today is that one of the other things about plot twists is that they don't have to be always so dramatic. Like a twist does not have to be a 180. It does not have to mean that something completely goes in another direction. It can just mean that something that they thought was in column A is in column A and a half. It's you can have little twists on certain situations without being the full Sixth Sense, he was dead the whole time, type of twist. And some of my favorite plot twists that I've ever run have been in that vein. I ran a campaign which there was a lot of governmental intrigue. The campaign really started with having this kind of secretive governmental structure that was above the entire continent, and people had become really distrusting of it. And the campaign began with this event sparking events into motion, which really confirmed people's suspicions. And as the party was kind of uncovering things as they went along, it kept twisting more and more into the rabbit hole. They kept discovering that, oh, no, this wasn't just a nefarious government. There's been something working in the shadow the whole time. Oh, this isn't just this thing working in the shadow the whole time. This is actually an extraplanar entity. Oh, this extraplanar entity isn't actually just an extraplanar entity. It's a god trying to enter this world through this particular ritual that's being enacted. And it's just slow twists that are slowly altering the narrative and slowly getting these little aha moments until you culminate into just something that's really intriguing and interesting. It doesn't have to be a 180.
Right.
And that's, I think, one of the key things to remember about plot twists. that goes back to you discussing about how you can overdo them. You could still incorporate a mini twist in a way that is going to be really interesting to your narrative.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I think that's everything to be discussed about plot twists today. I'm sure we'll come back to this in a more later episode. We lots of different things to be discussed about plot twists, but for now, why don't we head over to the wilds?
All right, let's go.
So we're back out here in the wilds. Today, we're going to be looking at the jackalwere, which can be found in the Monster Manual on page 193. And they're shape-changing humanoids that look almost like a were-jackal, for lack of a better term. It's clear from their art that they aren't wolves, like a werewolf, but they look almost lycanthropic in the way that they actually appear. But they began as regular jackals until the demon lord Grotz imbued them with power. And Grotz did this in order to make slaves for Lamias, which is a powerful monstrosity that loyally serves the demon lord, and we'll cover them another day. But he created these entities in order to serve them. And as such, they aren't strong. They're only a CR of 1/2. They're minion monsters. Monsters you're likely to encounter in the course of larger narratives involving either the Abyss or demons or Lamias or Grotz himself. But they have a couple really interesting abilities that make for fascinating storytelling opportunities.
Yeah, one of these is, in their lore, there's a line of text that reads, "A jackalwere is born to lie, and perceptive creatures might notice it wincing in pain when it speaks the truth."
I just find that so intriguing. You have to have a lot of these creatures in order to make a challenging combat encounter. They're just not that strong. Even at lower levels, a party is going to be able to defeat them relatively easily. But if you manage to capture one or interrogating one, having this almost built-in lie detector to this entity is just really interesting. There's a number of different ways where you can just have this pop into a narrative where you can show it to the player character that has the highest passive perception in the party, or you can just have players run checks for it. But being able to tell when this creature is lying because it's literally wincing in pain whenever you're interrogating it or asking it questions is just really intriguing to me.
Yeah, it's a good bit of flavor, I think. And that is, I think, as I said earlier in the episode, that's a really important part of running a good D&D session is kind of getting a good flavor and atmosphere for things. And so even though this is not like, it's not a useful thing about them, it's not a thing you can use against your players, but that's okay. It's actually, in fact, a weakness that they have that your players can exploit.
And you can use this even if they're unaware that this creature is a jackalwere, because they are shapeshifters and they do have the human-animal hybrid form and the full jackal form, but they can also be just a medium-sized human. And you can have this entity be an NPC that this party interacts with that is maybe secretively part of a larger storyline down the road. And the way you introduce that storyline is your perceptive players notice this attribute about this character that this human suddenly seems to wince in pain when they're talking to it sometimes. And without them even knowing what this entity is, it can hook them into a larger story or narrative.
Yeah, and it can have a human form, a jackal-humanoid hybrid, or just a small jackal. And I think that is both visually and in terms of, what the capabilities of a jackal as an animal, makes it very good for campaigns and adventures that rely on spies and intrigue. Because you can just imagine it shapeshifting into a jackal and sneaking into a city at night in its jackal form before morphing into a human. And like maybe your PCs notice that this character seems to wince when he lies, and maybe they roll some wisdom checks or do some research and figure out, well, maybe he's a jackalwere. Then they follow him and they see him transform and slip out of the city, and they can follow. There's a whole line of investigation that naturally follows from just the capabilities and powers of this creature.
Yeah, absolutely. And in combat, while they aren't strong, one of their interesting abilities is a special ability called a sleep gaze, which is, again, not strong. They're CR half.
Yeah, they're not supposed to be.
Yeah, the DC on this save is a wisdom saving throw of 10. So over half the time, this is just not going to work.
Sure.
But on a failed save, the creature magically falls asleep either for 10 minutes or until they're shaken awake. And this can be an interesting thing that the jackalwere can use to actually capture someone and bring them somewhere. Maybe bring them to their Lamia lord. Perhaps if you are overwhelming a low-level party with these creatures, they can put them all to sleep and drag them somewhere as part of an encounter. It creates an interesting combat encounter because you have these creatures which might not be able to kill a party, but on a poor roll can just take 2 members of your party off of the board by a couple of them putting a couple of your party members to sleep. And it just creates an interesting effect on a combat encounter.
Yeah, it's also a good way of creating a stressful opening to an attack. When my first thought of this was, their party is out camping, maybe with some NPCs, maybe they're part of a traveling group or something. And, they wake up in the middle of the night and the guards up and are asleep and they're running and shaking them awake. And whoever they were escorting has all been knocked out or half the party is unconscious. And now they're running around trying to wake everybody up, and you've maybe potentially cut the support of your party in half, which makes these low-level creatures much scarier. So there's lots of ways you can use this.
Yeah. Great little creatures.
Yeah, no, I like some of these weaker monsters in the monster manual because we spend a lot of time thinking about beholders and dragons and all this sort of thing, where there's a lot you can do with these smaller level creatures, even at higher level games, either in numbers or just creatively using their abilities.
Yeah. Well, I think that just about wraps up the jackalwere. Are we ready to leave the wilds behind and head to the friendly confines of the tavern?
Let's get to the tavern.
All right. Back here in the tavern.
Yep, here we are.
When I asked the barkeep if this ale was watered down, he seemed to wince a little bit in pain, but I can't quite figure out if there's anything going on with him, but
it's probably fine.
Yeah, it's probably fine. Today, our plot hook that we're going to be looking at is what would you do if someone evil ended up in a high seat of power? And this is a plot hook which is fairly common, as part of a larger storyline throughout a campaign. It's very common to have an evil ruler be the main antagonist of a story. But this particular plot hook assumes that this seat of power is normally occupied by someone good, normally occupied by a benevolent force, but through whatever occurrence, this throne or this high seat on the council or what have you has come to this evil entity. It could happen via the normal passing of a throne from a benevolent monarch to his son or daughter that's been corrupted by some sort of force or just is evil by themselves. It could happen via a coup where the ruling force is overthrown. It could happen via some dark and evil organization manipulating the monarch and using this person or propping up a particular NPC until they reach the highest seat of power on a council. Through whatever means, you end up with this normally benevolent force in your campaign, whether it be the leader in this important faction that your PCs are involved with, or the leader of the particular town or kingdom that your PCs are in. All of a sudden, now there's this nefarious force where there used to be a benevolent force. And that can create a lot of opportunities for storytelling.
Yeah, and I think the sort of storytelling opportunities that come from it really depend on what has gone wrong in what manner. Because when you say this, my first thought is that it's, perhaps they've become under the influence of some sort of entity or force that is manipulating them.
Yeah.
In which case, because if it's a the heir to the throne happens to be a malicious and evil person, well, that's not too hard to sort out. You eliminate them as a problem.
Yeah.
If it's a good king who has gone mad because a demon has gotten into his head, or or he's being possessed by the spirit of an older king who went mad, something like that, then you have a conflict of, okay, well, we can't just kill him. We need to find a way to exercise this or get rid of this influence and protect him because we know this guy.
Yeah, that's almost like the instance in The Lord of the Rings with Theoden, where he was slowly over time, this benevolent king was corrupted by Saruman via Wormtongue. And if you picture the Fellowship coming to them and encountering Theoden, there was this decision. Well, do they fight this nefarious force? Do they try to investigate and figure out where the problem is coming from? Do they just eliminate that king and then miss the fact that Wormtongue and Saruman were the real problems? And it just creates an interesting little avenue that the players have to discover.
Yeah. My second thought on this was that we were often talking about this in terms of like kingdoms and councils and everything else. You can also do this on a much smaller scale.
True.
So we've talked a bit before in previous episodes about giving your players kind of breaths of relief and just letting them calm down and things be quiet for a minute after big, exciting things. The thought that came to mind with this is that if you have a town that your players pass through on a regular basis and there's like a friendly mayor there, maybe that mayor has been ousted by, some sort of corrupt individual, and the adventure becomes about this smaller adventure of, okay, well, we need to figure out why this guy got ousted and how do we get the new one in. And that could be supernatural. Maybe a hag has taken over the town or something like that, or a doppelganger or shape-changing abilities. But you can do this on a much smaller level with much lower stakes if you're looking for a entertaining but smaller scale sort of adventure in your campaign.
Well, I think that will just about wrap up this episode of Plot Hooks. I'd like to thank Matt for joining me, of course, again today. And thanks for listening from all of us here at Plot Hooks. Me, Samuel, Matt, Dave, Mike, Steve, Zach, Becca, and podcast pupper Ellie. We'll see you all again next week for another episode of Plot Hooks.